To talk about probability, we need some definitions. So first of all, any trial action for which the result is uncertain, we call an experiment. Okay, so when you do something and you don't know what's going to happen, the thing you're doing is called the experiment. Now, the possible results of the experiment, we call those outcomes. Okay, so we could talk about, there could be lots of different possible outcomes. There may just be one possible outcome, all right? But whatever might happen as a result of the experiment is going to be called an outcome. Now, there are usually multiple outcomes. Sometimes there's many, many possible outcomes. If we look at the set of all possible outcomes of an experiment, we call that the sample space of the experiment. Okay, so it's the set of all the possible things that could happen. So for example, if I'm drawing a random card from a deck of cards, my sample space consists of 52 outcomes because there's 52 cards in that deck, in the standard deck. And then when we look at collections of multiple outcomes in a sample space, then we call that an event. All right, and so events can include multiple different outcomes. So let's look at an example just to kind of nail down what's happening here. We're going to look at just the sample spaces here. So we're going to find the sample space for each of these experiments. So our first one is that you toss one coin and note heads or tails. Okay, so our sample space, we usually denote with an S, and then we write it as a set, where we have braces, curly braces, and we list the possible outcomes. So we're tossing one coin, and so we want to list the possible outcomes. Well, we're noting heads or tails. There's, of course, only those two possibilities. So my outcome could be heads, which I'll denote with an H, or it could be a tails, which I'll denote with a T. So this would be our sample space for tossing one coin. For part B, you toss two coins and note heads or tails on each. Now our sample space is a little bit different because with our two coins, there's several possibilities. Okay, both of the coins could be heads. I'll denote that with HH. Okay, both coins are heads. The first coin could be heads and the second coin could be a tails. Or we could flip that around and the first could be a tails and the second could be a heads. Or both could be tails. So that's our sample space for tossing two coins and noting heads or tails. And for part C, you toss three coins and note heads or tails on each. So hopefully the second one kind of gives us an idea of how we're going to do that. We're going to have three possibilities for each coin. So we could have all heads, so heads, heads, heads. Or we're going to have just one tails. Now, the one tails could be any of the three coins, so that's going to give us three possibilities. We could have a tail, heads, heads. Okay. Or the second coin could be a tails, so heads, tails, heads. Or the third coin could be a tails, so heads, heads, tails. Okay, then we might have two tails and one heads. And in that case, okay, that one heads could be, again, any of the three coins. So it could be heads, tails, tails, or tails, heads, tails, or tails, tails, heads. And finally, our last possibility is that we get all tails. Tails, tails, tails. So those are our sample spaces.